Greetings all, welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion in the Levy and Stockwell text Call Dimensions. We're going to be focusing today on practice, using call to practice with the 4 skills or the 2 databases. We're also going to look at some objectives and things that you ought to know before you actually start using these tools or materials. We'll look a little bit about designing call-related materials and what you need to be on the lookout for when you do that, and some constraints, some limitations of using call-related materials. Let's jump right in here to the introduction. And the first thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of call materials are actually designed and created for a specific skill. They're broken down into a particular skill or particular database. I'm not saying that's good or bad or right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the way it is. It's the way they're made generally. And not all areas get the same level of attention or focus. There are far more sites out there dedicated to grammar or writing or vocabulary, and far fewer that are dedicated to things like speaking or pronunciation. It's unequal, probably because the capturing of pronunciation is more difficult on the web. The capturing of someone's speaking ability is more difficult, and so they get less materials and activities and software that is out there for people to use. All well and good. Sometimes you can find sites or materials that are integrated and they use multiple skills or multiple databases. That's good. But oftentimes the breakouts are the mainstay, and there are times, if you study your TESOL methodologies, there are times where a focus on form is important, or a focus on a particular skill set is important, and so sometimes that's necessary. We should always remember that communication does not occur in a vocabulary and grammar vacuum. Amen. We can't just study vocab and grammar and think that everything's going to be hunky-dory. We do need to study the skills. And whole language is also something that we should focus on, just for fluency purposes. So, yes, we're going to be looking at some of these call materials, and yes, some of them are going to be limited to certain areas, but don't only use that. We need to have the whole language, the fluency practice as well. Let's take a look at some of these 4 skills and the databases. Look at some of the ways that we can use call in these areas. So, for example, in listening, there's a whole bunch of audio segments that are out there on the web. The internet, which is something that I didn't even include in this little lecture here, is one of your best friends for finding materials. If you live overseas, if you live in a country that their first language is not English, you don't have a problem now, provided you have internet access. Because now you can go on the web and you can get thousands of clips for listening and having students practice with authentic language. Now, obviously, you want to find something that's short, something that's short enough that your students aren't going to be lost as they go through. But it's going to be authentic language. Good. That's one of the great benefits for listening materials. You can go out and get them. In the past, you had to have a cassette player, or you had to find a native speaker. You don't have to do that anymore. A lot of it's already out there and recorded. That's the power of the internet that's working for you there. For speaking activities, well, you can practice, and there is some speaking tools that are out there. A lot of them are not interactive unless you do things like Skype or Google Hangout. There are sites out there also where you have listen and then copy, and that's a listening activity more than a speaking activity. But there are fewer speaking tools that are out there unless you go interactive. And Skype, there are others that are out there, as I said, Google Hangout. They're great ways to communicate. Live communication where you've got speaking and interacting going on. You have to have a native speaker, though. That's the real issue there. You've got to have a native speaker willing to participate in a conversation. Reading, call-related reading things. Again, the internet is going to be your friend because you have hundreds of thousands of sites on the internet that have readings that your students can use to practice reading. Now, some are ESL specific. Some are specifically out there and designed for ESL. Others are just straight short articles, short stories, advertisements where they have to read things. And all those things are free. They're authentic materials, they're a variety of levels, and they're just sitting out there on the web. Writing tools on the web they do exist. They're a little harder to use because assessment is harder to do. Now, you can use things like Zoho Docs or Google Docs because those things are sitting there on the web, and you can share those things with other people. You can write to a larger audience. Literally, I can have 15 classes hooked into one document and everybody writing to that document, or having everybody share their documents with people from other places, other countries, and participate together in the writing as far as and the assessment as well. So that's one of the nice things about something like Google Docs or Zoho. But the actual tools, they're a little more difficult to find because of the assessment component. In the world of grammar, again, there are tutorials, there are instruction sets out there, there are practice sheets, there are web-based practice sheets. So in other words, you don't have to print it out and give it to a student. They can literally do it online and find their answers. There are tons of places on YouTube where people have little tutorials about many different aspects of grammar. And so there's a lot of those types of things. People make hot potatoes activities and just set them out there, grammar-related hot potatoes activities. And so there's a lot of places for grammar. Grammar is one of the stronger of the 6 components here that we're talking about. There's a lot of material on that. There's also a lot of material on vocabulary. Practicing for vocabulary is pretty big on the web, and there are places where you can find, the top 3,000 words that you need to study and what they are, and there are flashcard programs and sharing and exchanging and quizzes and a whole bunch of different things for vocabulary. Lastly is going to be pronunciation, and again, pronunciation is a little more difficult on the web because assessment is going to be the problem. You can have students learn about it, you can show them things, and direct them where or how they're supposed to pronounce something, but assessing how this person is actually pronouncing something is less common on the web. It is something that should be developed. Hello, developers. If you're interested to go out there and develop pronunciation assessment tools for web-based materials, call-related materials, that would be great. All right, before I jump into this need to know, let's just jump to the web and look at some of the some of the tools or websites that you could be using for all the things that I just talked about. I just quickly ran over them, but if you go look on the web, you'll see, for example, sites like ELO. ELO stands for English Listening Lab, English Language Listening Lab Online, and this is a site where you can go, and it's a listening lab. You just go here and you can listen to a story. So, for example, this is the first one that I picked up. I'm just going to click on this one real quick. And this is the question, is love at first sight. And it'll basically this guy, I forget who this guy is again. He breaks everything down to by level, intermediate, beginning, intermediate, advanced. And he's got the dialogue here, so you can read along, and you can just click here and listen.
So, do you believe in love at first sight?
I think it does exist. I think you can have sort of a spark at first sight, but what I consider as love is a bit different to what that first kind of meeting would be. If you can have something like, and then you think that person has a real possibility, I think that's what you mean by love at first sight. But you can't instantly love someone. It takes growth. It takes coming together, shared.
All right, so that's just an example. And so you've got a nice little dialogue here that you can look at the dialogue. So you can listen. It is a fairly natural type of interview, among friends possible type of thing. But these are great sites for listening. You have your students come here, they listen, they can read the dialogue, and then you can give them questions to confirm as far as an assessment is concerned. They actually do have quizzes here as well, I believe. You can also download these as an MP3 and save them. So they do a lot of nice things here with ELO. I highly recommend it. That's just one listening site. Let's go take a look at another one, which is Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Cafe. It's a great site as well. Again, easy, medium, and difficult. We'll just take this one right here. And so you come to this site, and you can use all these listening materials. Randall has done an excellent job in setting all this up. Years ago, this didn't exist. Years ago, he used real audio, but everything has been redesigned. Kudos to you, Randall, if you remember who I am. So he's got a listening segment here, and then there are questions that you can answer, and it's automatically scored. Let's take a quick listen to this one.
Ryan, I just want you to know that I'm going to school to become an auto mechanic.
Oh, what? Does Dad know about this?
Who cares? It's my life. I really enjoy working on cars.
I get it. You want to study auto mechanics because of your new boyfriend. What's his name? Jimmy or something? Listen, auto mechanics is a man's job.
No, you got it all wrong.
What?
First of all, his name is James. And second, he doesn't work at an auto shop anymore. He had a job there for 5 years, and he really liked his job because he really learned how to identify and fix problems. You, on the other hand, can't even change.
All right, so that's how this works. And then you can answer the questions as you go. Notice with this one, there is no actual dialogue, which some researchers will say that's good. Let them hear it orally so that they can notice the oral part. And, of course, the other one that we were looking at had both of them. There are arguments for that side as well. But these are great sites for listening. Places where you can send your students, places where you can link into your course website so that they can go do that and then come back and answer questions type of thing. So Randall has done great work here with listening, and so has the other gentleman who's set up the LO site. Let's go take a look at speaking. This is a place called ESL Gold, and you may want to go and investigate this place. This is more business related, but they have a lot of materials that are sitting out there. If you'll notice all their headings here, they've got materials for speaking, listening, reading, writing, grammar, vocab, your main 6 things, plus they have information for TOEIC and the like. So there's a lot of materials that are sitting here, and they have speaking materials. Now, a lot of these speaking materials are not interactive, and so they're materials where they have to listen to something and respond, or they have to speak something, or, for example, here, topics for conversation aren't necessarily call-related, some of these, but some of them are. This is just one example of a place where you could go, and that would be ESL Gold. Another thing you could do is use something like Skype. You find native speakers, and you can set up Skype and have them communicate with each other. I've done this. I've taken a group of college students and had them call a friend of mine who was a 6th grade teacher. Okay, and I was in Japan, and they were overseas. They were in the United States, and we would set up a time, and we would get together, and we would have our students talk to one another. It was a great opportunity for my students to practice their English. It was a good opportunity for his students to learn about a second culture and a second country. So it's an excellent opportunity, provided you have the manpower. Okay, another possibility would be something like Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts is similar to Skype. It does allow you to do a couple other interesting things and have more people on the line, so you could have multiple groups coming together. But it's the same type of limitation. You need to have those bodies available, not just your classroom. Take a look at some more here. These are short stories. I can't believe when I ran across this. 365 short stories for ESL. So these are short stories. These are, I don't believe these are native speakers. But you can listen to one of these and then go ahead and let's take a look at one. This is the one that I've already looked at earlier. Okay, so as this is set up, here's the actual story that you could read, or listen. You also have the audio sitting here.
Pete was in his kitchen. He was about to slice 3 green apples.
Okay, so you can continue listening to that if you want. This is at eslfast.com. But it's very nice that this is all written out, and you have the audio. It is a story. And below here, you've got things like, you can practice vocabulary, you can answer yes-no questions, you can do a close. Now, I looked at the close, and lo and behold, what is it? This is a hot potatoes activity related to what was being spoken earlier. This is actually the entire story put out in a close so that they can practice with it later on. So that's the close. So there's a crossword puzzle, and there are some other things here that they can do as well, all with the story. This is a great reading site. You can read a story, you can hear it read to you, you can test yourself against the vocabulary, and do an actual close with the reading material. Really like this whole idea that's put here under this ESL Fast. And actually, I believe the gentleman who created all these is from China. I'm not sure, but I believe that he is. And these are just, again, this is just another site, ESL Short Stories. Thank you again for the guys who created this. This is actually the guy who did it, I believe. His name is Rong Chan. I don't know where he's from. But this is the same type of materials, only it's broken down by age level, or here's one for ESL, ESL beginners, intermediates, and again, it's just reading materials, stuff that's sitting out there. If you don't like stuff that's specifically designed for ESL, okay, you want to use authentic language, there are tons of sites out there about short stories, about news articles for kids, about straight from the news or poetry, things that you can just take and look. Okay, the ones I'm showing you here are specifically designed for ESL, but you don't have to use those. You could just use native speak. You could go out and find native stories. There's one story that I just loved. It was about a girl who came home and was struggling with some issues. It was just a regular news article, a regular short story, but I had my students take that story and respond to it as if they were native speakers. Didn't have any issue with it. So you can use those types of things as well. Okay, and so this is reading. This is another reading activity. This site is old. You'll note that it begins way back in 1995, right around the birth of internet access for the general populace. The Internet TESOL Journal, started by two guys out in Japan, and it continues to grow every year. They're constantly putting up new materials. And just to show you the things that are here, you can go look at archived information. You can look at stuff all the way back, from the mid 90s to the present, and they've broken things down to all these different things: articles that people have written, lessons that people have submitted, techniques, questions, games, jokes, things for teachers, things for students. Now let's just go look at the current one now. Okay, so these are 812 articles that are posted here. And so you can just go look. Well, here are some lesson articles. Here are some techniques. Right? Here's another article. Again, something else. Here's all the authors. And so you can find a whole bunch of different things here for you to study and or use. They're free. None of this costs any money. They put them up there because they're open sourcers. They're Creative Commons type people. They do want to let you know who the owner was, but that's about it. So they also have all these other sites. ESL for Grammar, A for ESL, their home site. They've got grammar quizzes, vocab, bilingual quizzes. You can write quizzes. There's lots of stuff that's available here. Hundreds of thousands of pages. Okay, here are a bunch of their quizzes. I'm just looking at the quizzes page, right? But I can do a search for so many different things. Grammar from A to Z. Whole bunch of activities that's just sitting here for students to use. So this is a great site. Definitely one that I would highly recommend that you come and look at for looking for materials, whether they're individual or not. Now, a lot of these materials aren't call materials. They are, in fact, regular materials that you're most likely going to print out. Now, that's not always true. I take that back. There's a group here who wrote a whole thing on using commercials. You go to YouTube, for example. All these commercials are sitting there, and you can use the commercial as a listening activity, as a reading activity, as a speaking activity. You can use them all for that. Those types of things are going to be here as well. I highly recommend this site. Way to go, Charlie, for the work that you're doing here. Here's another site entitled the ESLdesk.com, and they just got tons of materials in this one for just vocabulary. There's lots of different activities here where you can practice and learn, and there are lists and there are games, and I'm not going to go into any more of those. Here's another one that I really do enjoy. It used to be called Flashcard Exchange. They've now changed their name, and apparently they've got a little more money. They're now called cram.com, and here you can find flashcards from all over the place. There are flashcards upon flashcards upon flashcards here, and these flashcards can be shared. So you can come here to this site and just find flashcards. Look how many flashcards are listed here, right? And you can share them. You can go look them up and do somebody else's. You can give yours to somebody else. I had a student who was studying linguistics in one of my classes and created a whole bunch of materials with this site, and then they shared it with everybody else in the class, so that everybody else would have access to basically their cheat sheet of necessary vocabulary words for linguistics. So it's a great site. Oftentimes, if I want to study something, like when I was really studying Japanese, I could come here and find the 2,500 top Chinese characters that I would need to study. They're sitting here. I can just go here, find them, and study them. They have tools here for studying. They have games here for studying, specifically for grammar, right? Specifically for vocabulary. Here are grammar activities, and again, this is off of the A4 ESL. These guys here, off of their site. Whole bunch of different types of activities for studying grammar. Lots and lots of different activities. Again, not all of these are call activities, but the materials are sitting here online. When I show teachers, and I'm only showing you a small amount of all the things that are sitting out there that are available to you as an ESL teacher for your students. When I show people just the little bit that I've showed them, I then look at them and say, why would you ever purchase a textbook? Why would you make your students buy a textbook when you have all these materials freely available sitting on the web? And of course, you can take natural native stuff and make materials out of them as well. As I mentioned before, the commercials, you can use those. You can go to other places where stuff is just freely sitting there, designed for ESL, or you can do the native speaker things. So there are a lot of materials that are sitting out there. I should make a list of all the ones that I have used in the past, or ones that I would recommend. Again, I've only shown you a few of them that are here. Last one that I wanted to show you, which is not listed here, would be Google Docs. Bing. And so with Google Docs, you can create a document. This would be for a group of students to come together and share. You can share this with somebody. I can share this with multiple students, and so they can read and respond together. I can share this with multiple classrooms, so they can share and read and write together. They can help respond to one another and that kind of thing. So this is one writing place. Again, this is not specifically for ESL, but I certainly can use this when I'm trying to teach ESL to students. Again, writing, there are a lot of materials online just for tutorials and walkthroughs and how do you do this and how do you set it up and example papers and that kind of thing. They're sitting all over the place on the web. So just to come back and say, you know, I have a list here of things. There are hundreds of sites for a lot of these areas sitting there waiting for you. There are thousands of materials, hundreds of call-related activities that you can use for your students to learn. Okay, and mostly what I showed you today were the ESL-related things. Next time I should probably just show you general ed type of materials where your students can have access and practice using a whole bunch of these different tools. Let's move on. And now let's talk about some things that you'll need to do. You'll need to know before you start using these call materials. One is that you should know what your objectives are. Don't simply use call because call is there. This is like, you know, the guy I used to go bowling with so many years ago, and he had the bowling shirt and the bowling ball and the shoes and the glove and the, you know, he had that special towel that you use to wipe off the ball. He couldn't bowl to save his life, but he had all the neat stuff. Okay? You make sure that you're not just using call because you're using call. You're going to use it for the objectives that you have set up. You use the tools as they're designed to be used, or how they can be used to advance your students. Okay? So make sure that you know why you're using these things and what's the purpose of using these call materials. You should also know the technology that you're using, the pedagogical implications of them. This means that if I want to use LO, I should go there and play with it first, get to know what it is and how it's used. If I make sure I understand the materials that I want my students to play with, how I'm going to assess that they're actually learning something off of the site, okay, I'm going to need to know the tech. I'm going to need to know the pedagogical implications. I'm going to use them to my advantage so that I can reach my objectives. Always, I would say, multimodal is probably better because it allows your student to use more senses, to understand more information. But at the same time, I don't want to overload my students, which is very possible. You need to keep an eye on your students, which is something that I would call a control, or watching for that affective filter as it goes up and down. Because you may be giving them more and more opportunities. You may be giving them more multimodal activity experiences, but you may overload them. You need to realize when they're being overloaded, and you need to back off. Let them just use what they have. Also, you should realize just because you have a lot of tools doesn't mean that they're going to learn more simply because you have a lot of tools. Again, that's like the guy who's got, a wall full of tools in his garage, but he doesn't know how to use any of them. You got to make sure that the tools are actually useful. They got to be used well. What does this mean? Training, and more training for both groups, for the teacher and for the student. I'm sure that you've heard stories about where a teacher is saying, "Oh, I wanted to use this device in my room, but I didn't know how to use it," or "I wanted to use this device, so I had a student come tell me how it's supposed to be used." Well, that's not the way it ought to be. You as the teacher should know all the stuff that's in your room, all the opportunities that you have, or in this case, all of the tools in your digital toolbox so that you can use them. You have to do the homework. You also need to train your students to use those tools. It shouldn't be the other way around. You also should recognize that students have different abilities. They have different preferences as far as how they learn or how they like to study. So you want to make sure that you're not overloading them with materials or skills or activities that is not going to be good for them to learn. Bear in mind, I understand you can't please all of your students all the time, but you want to be able to have a good balance. One of the reasons why I like group activities and I like paired activities, because some people don't do well in groups. They do better in a smaller range. You want to have that variety, but you need to realize that when you're starting to use call materials. Okay. You also need to make sure your students have the language ability. Do they have the equipment in language in order to use it? If you're dealing with people who just get off the boat from Cambodia, and they don't speak a lick of English, I don't think that you're going to put them on Google Docs and have them to start writing, because they don't have the language skills in order to use the technology. And of course, those people probably may not have the technology skills. And so you need to make sure that your students are ready for the call materials or the call activities that you're going to be introducing. Because if they're not ready, why in the world are you using them? You need to build them up to it. Now, I'm saying yes, you want to eventually build them up to that, because that's where the more interesting and more useful call materials are. But don't throw them at the deep end if they don't know how to swim yet, if you'll follow my analogy. Okay. Also, you should keep an eye on first impressions. A lot of times people get a bad first impression of technology and they tend to want to stay away from it. Try to make sure that their impressions of it is good so that they want to continue moving forward in using them. If we want to design call materials, we should realize that it's a complex process. We have not only the objectives that we need to understand and make sure that our students can understand, but we also need to make sure that the call that we use can accomplish what it is that we're trying to do, which means we need to find some way of assessing it. Okay, so we just can't have them go out and use vocabulary, flashcards. How are we verifying that this is actually reaching the objective that I've set up for the course or set up for the activity? So it's a more complex process because we're adding the digital on top of what we already would normally have in a classroom. So we need to consider the cognitive complexities and the user's perspective. Don't overload them in such a way that they're not going to want to do this, or it's too difficult for them to do. I've got this added thing that I've got to go on. Another good idea would be to have teachers evaluate the stuff that you're making. They might have a better perspective because they're used to teaching. They're not just a language learner. But give it to them and show them how to do this. Okay? We want to do more than just show them how to do this. We want to encourage them to use these materials as well. Lastly, when you're designing materials, it's always good to stress for autonomy. You as a language teacher, your primary goal is always to get out of a job. To make it so that your students can do these things by themselves. They can become self-learners. That's a better way to learn language. Now, they're going to need you initially. They're going to be leaning on you. You're going to be in part of their zone of proximal development. But eventually, you want that circle to grow so that they don't need you anymore. They can do things on their own. And that's the way you want to design call materials as well. Lastly, I want you to remember that you need to recognize there are limits here of using this. We're not talking about a whole lot about whole language that's involved here. In a lot of these things that we were just looking at. You need to recognize I need to change up as I'm teaching. Yes, I may focus on grammar at one point or writing at another point, but now I need to get together and do discussions in a classroom. I need to get away from the text so that I can do something else, because it can't do everything. You also need to recognize that you might have a hardware issue. Right? You might have a teacher knowledge issue. Teacher doesn't know how to use it. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, oh yeah, I went into this school and they had a whiteboard in every room and no teachers knew how to use them. You may have the hardware, but you may not know how to use that. Okay? And just my opinion, by the way, you future teachers, if you've got a whiteboard in your room, it's your responsibility to figure out how that thing works. So go in there and practice with it, play with it, take advantage of the tools that you have. You also have a constraint of knowing what your users or what your students are like. And so you need to learn about them. You need to read up on them. You need to talk with them. You may have a constraint of time. You just don't have the time to train your students because you've got too many other things that you need to do. Often a problem in the public schools or colleges where you've been given a list of things that you have to get through, and it's harder to train them on new technologies because you don't have the time. You may not have the support. You may not have the funding. You may not have web access. You may not have the integration. You may not have the ability to put these tools together in order to use them. You may have a failure in hardware, a failure in software. The internet might be down. All these things might happen, therefore have a backup plan. Make sure that you have a backup plan when you're using technology because it may not work. You want to be ready just in case. My opinion is that you should always have a backup plan. But with technology, it's an added frustration because the tech can fail. All right, just a little recap here. There are a whole bunch of materials and activities and tools that are out there for studying the 4 skills and the 2 databases. I've only touched the surface. There are many more that you can add. In fact, if you want to add more, you can add them downstairs on the comments bar. Make sure that you understand the objectives for what you're doing. Make sure that your students know this. Let's see here. The introduction of the computer will invariably alter the classroom culture, and you're seeing that happen today. Again, if we look at flipped education and all the things that are happening at Khan Academy, definitely true. And so we want to make sure that we're getting a using call to teach the language, but we also want to let people know that our passion is to see our students grow and proceed and grow in such a way that they don't need us anymore. And so we want to be able to do that. A little harder to see that through the tech, but we can do that. That's all I have for today, folks. I want to thank you all for being here. If you do have any questions, again, you can shoot them downstairs, or you can send me an email. Other than that, you guys have a nice day. Bye-bye now.